Hi, this is Kevin Bowersox, creator of the Two Thought blog. Today we're going to look at setting up a JPA one-to-one relationship. We will go over the plane relationship and then we will also make it bidirectional. To start, we're going to begin from a base project that was created in the Configuring Spring Data with MySQL post. And to download the code to follow along, you can click on the GitHub link right below this post. And from GitHub, you will be able to download the source code and follow along. Let's head over to STS and we can begin. So the first thing you'll notice is that we have an entity post. In order to relate post to another entity, we need a second entity. So let's create a new class. We'll call it postPart. And in this class, we'll add two fields. The first being of type integer, and we'll call it postPart ID. The second will be of type string, and we'll just simply call it body. And then we can generate our getters and setters for this object. And now we can begin to add our JPA annotations. So we want to give it the entity annotation and the table annotation. We'll import those annotations. We'll add the ID annotation and the generated annotation. Sorry, I think it's generated value. And we'll specify a strategy. And I'm going to say it's identity. And we'll also specify the column. And we'll specify the column for body. Import those annotations. And at this point our class is wired. So the next thing required is to create a repository. Remember, our repositories must be an interface. And we will extend the JPA repository interface. We provide the type of the entity and the type of its ID. And we'll import the postPart class. So at this point our repository is set up. Now we can create a test for this repository. And I'm just going to copy our test from the previous tutorial, and I'll give it a new name. And the reason I did that is then I don't have to rewrite all the Spring configuration. So we just have to make a few changes here. And we might as well just take out this method. And we'll import the postPart repository. And now we can begin writing our test. So we'll set the postPart body, and then we will save that using the repository. And then we'll use the repository to find it. We'll make sure it's not null. and we'll check the body field. And this will also require us to import the assert methods from JUnit. And another thing you'll notice is we're pointing at the application context, which in the previous tutorial was set up to use MySQL. We want to use our test context, which is set up to use the H2 database. So I'm going to uncomment this line and comment this line, and then we'll run our unit tests. Okay, so we can successfully insert our post part. Now we can get to the matter of how do we set up a relationship between post part and post, and then eventually how do we make that relationship bidirectional. To begin setting up the relationship, let's head back to post, and within post we can add a post part. And we'll make all these fields private while we're here. That's something I forgot in the other tutorial. So we added a post part to our post class, and now we'll generate the getters and setters, and then we will annotate the post part with a one-to-one annotation. We'll import that annotation, and then we also need to specify a join column, which will tell JPA what column to perform the join on. In a sense, if you were doing a regular join, this would be the on clause, where you say, on post.postPartID is equal to postpart.postPartID. So we want to specify the name of our join column, which is going to be postPartID. And normally I would have had to have created this in my database schema, but since H2 is set up to have the DDL automatically generated when I start up the test class, I don't need to do that. But working with a real database, I would need to perform that action. With the relationship in place, let's test it out. So we can go to our post repository test, and we can create a new test. And the first thing we'll need to do is create a post. So I'm just going to steal some code here. Actually, I'm going to steal this whole test. We probably could have just modified that, but that's alright. So we create a post, and then we save the post, we pull it out of the database, and we do some checking on it. You'll notice we're not even mentioning post part there, so we'll need to create a post part. So I'm going to borrow some code from our post part test, make a post part within the test, and then set the post part for this object. And then what we can do is make sure that our post part actually has, our post actually has a post part by running a null check on it here in JUnit. So to recap, we create a post, we create a post part, we set the post part field, we save it, then we pull the post from the repository, make sure it's not null, make sure the post part is not null, and then we're printing the title there. So let's see what happens with this test. we got an error. Specifying that it cannot find the column. This would make sense because we're still using the old application context pointing at the MySQL database. So we'll switch that over to the test context, which is using the auto-generated DDL. We'll run that. And we still get a failure. And it's telling us that we are referencing an unsaved transient instance. This simply means that our entity was not within the transaction. So we'll just make our test class transactional, and that should solve this issue. And now we have a running test. What was happening? We were creating this outside of our session, so we need our session to include this object. And since the class was not running within the transaction, it wasn't putting this new class into the session. So when Hibernate saved, it didn't recognize it. It thought it was detached. So we have successfully created a one-to-one relationship between the post and postpart entity. Now we are going to create a bidirectional relationship between the post and postpart entities. What we mean by bidirectional is that the post can access the postpart through its accessors, the getter method, and the postpart can also access the post through its accessors, creating, a bidirectional. We can access either entity from the other entity. So the first thing we'll need to do is add a field of type post to the postpart, and then we specify the one-to-one mapping, which defines our relationship. And then we need to set the mapped by property to point at the field on the post class that defines the postpart. So in this instance, it will be postpart, because when we look at post, we can see that postpart contains the annotations that defines this relationship, mainly the join column. So let's head back over to postpart. We'll save that. And now we can go to the postpart test and test the bidirectional nature of the relationship. So once again, I'm just going to copy this test, and we'll need to steal from our post test to get the post. And then we will set we forgot to create accessors for our post object. We can do that quickly. We'll head back to our test, and now we should have set post, which will pass in the post object we just created. So just to recap, we create the post, we create the post part, we set the post parts post field, and then we save the post part, and now we just need to set up a check to make sure that we have a post on the post part. So we'll save that. It's not liking something. Whoops. The casing's off. And one other thing I'm going to do is just check that we are using the test context. And I'm also going to have to make this transactional. If not, it would tell me that post is an unsaved post is an unsaved transient in this case. So let's run our test. Whoops, looks like we got some errors. Okay, took care of those. And we're having an issue loading our application context. I assume the issue's with our mapping in post part. And there it is. I even showed it to you. There we are mapping by the post part field. Well, when we look in post, there is no post part field with an uppercase P, so I've improperly mapped the one-to-one relationship. So let's have it point at the proper field on post, and we'll try running this again. And now our bidirectional relationship is set up. So we can access either entity from the inverse side, which is the definition of a bidirectional relationship. Our tests are running, and that's the end of this tutorial. I hope you join me again for the next tutorial. Until then.